Our final story is called Mr. Cheeky, written by the same artists. Let me put the camera a bit closer a minute. There we are. Is that better? Brilliant. Here we go then. Mr. Greedy was sitting down at his kitchen table, having breakfast. Cornflakes, toast, eggs, butter, marmalade, milk, sugar, and more toast, when there was a knock at the door. As he opened it, somebody barged past him. That somebody sat down and poured some of Mr. Greedy's cornflakes into Mr. Greedy's bowl. Mr. Greedy didn't know what to say. The somebody ate the cornflakes. Then the somebody ate the toast, the eggs, the butter, the marmalade, milk, and sugar, and got up to go. "Thanks, Tubby," laughed the somebody as he walked out to the door. Mr. Greedy just couldn't believe what had happened. His breakfast, all gone. Now you would have to agree that somebody who could do that would have to be very cheeky. The cheekiest somebody in the world. Mr. Cheeky. Mr. Cheeky walked down the lane from Mr. Greedy's house with a wide grin on his face. He was enjoying himself, and he continued to enjoy himself for the rest of the day. Further along the lane, Mr. Cheeky met Miss Neat, who was painting her fence. "Do you want to do some painting?" asked Miss Neat. Mr. Cheeky picked up a spare paintbrush and painted over Miss Neat's glasses. "Thanks, Four Eyes," he laughed. Miss Neat was lost for words. Just outside town, Mr. Cheeky met Mr. Nosy. Mr. Nosy had hurt the end of his nose. "Could you help me bandage my nose?" he asked. "Do it yourself, Big Nose," laughed Mr. Cheeky. Mr. Nosy was lost for words. Mr. Cheeky walked into town and went to the baker's. He walked straight to the front of the queue. "Excuse me?" asked Mr. Small, who was next in line. "There's a queue here." "And I'm at the front of it, Shorty," laughed Mr. Cheeky, and stuck his tongue out. Mr. Small was lost for words. Mr. Cheeky walked out feeling very pleased with himself. Mr. Muddle asked him for directions to the greengrocer's to buy some toothpaste. Mr. Cheeky told him to get lost, and Mr. Muddle did. That evening, while out for a walk, Miss Neat met Mr. Greedy and Mr. Muddle. Mr. Cheeky needs to be taught a lesson," said Miss Neat. "I agree," said Mr. Greedy. "I disagree," said Mr. Muddle, who was as muddled as usual. "And I know just the person to teach him that lesson," said Miss Neat. Very early the next morning, Mr. Cheeky was awoken by a knock at his door. It was Miss Bossy. "I've come to stay," announced Miss Bossy. "But," began Mr. Cheeky. "No buts, and I'd like my breakfast. Right away," ordered Miss Bossy. "Get it yourself," said Mr. Cheeky. "Wrong! Breakfast, now, please," yelled Miss Bossy. Mr. Cheeky was lost for words. Mr. Cheeky was so stunned that he actually did it as he was told. After breakfast, he decided to go for a walk. He wasn't enjoying Miss Bossy's company very much. "Don't forget the washing up," cried Miss Bossy. "Do it yourself," said Mr. Cheeky. "Wrong! Washing up, now, please," ordered Miss Bossy. Mr. Cheeky washed up. After washing up, Mr. Cheeky tried to creep out through the back door. "Where do you think you're going?" cried Miss Bossy. "The lawn needs cutting," she said. "Cut it yourself," said Mr. Cheeky. "Wrong! Lawn! Cut! Now, please," ordered Miss Bossy. Mr. Cheeky cut the lawn. And so it continued all week long. Every time Mr. Cheeky opened his mouth or tried to sneak away, there was Miss Bossy shouting, "Wrong! Wrong! Wrong!" At the end of a very tiring week, it was a very miserable Mr. Cheeky who answered the door when Mr. Greedy and Miss Neat visited. It was also a very polite Mr. Cheeky. He made them tea, he offered them biscuits, Mr. Greedy ate 5 of them, and he didn't call Mr. Greedy Tubby, and he didn't call Miss Neat Four Eyes. Well, I think it worked, announced Miss Neat. He is a changed person, agreed Mr. Greedy. I think you could go home now, Miss Bossy. That's a shame, she replied. I was really enjoying myself. Mr. Cheeky showed them to the door. And remember, said Miss Bossy, any more of your cheek, and I shall be around to stay again. Mr. Cheeky closed the door, and then very softly, under his breath, he said, Bossy Boots. The door sprang open. That's right, cried Miss Bossy, and went home chuckling to herself. Now time for our bedtime lesson.